Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to the second part of my A to Z Readathon wrap-up. In this video I'm going to cover books F through L with the exception of K because I didn't read a book for K. The first book is Fairyland by McAuley, which I've already talked about in a Clark Award Winners Batch wrap-up. So the summary is, I enjoyed this. I thought it was written in a very interesting style that really hooked me, but there were some plot weaknesses that made the second half of the book not hang together so well. Nevertheless, it was a pretty enjoyable read and I liked the ideas in it. For G, I read Greybeard by Aldiss, which turned out to be a very interesting book featuring old characters. It's pretty rare to pick up a book in science fiction or fantasy and have older people be the protagonist, or for, like in this case, an entire cast to be old people. I'm gonna just put out there, people in this book are old. Some of them are really, really old. And that's because back in the 40s and 50s when humans set off the first nuclear bombs in the atmosphere, it caused radiation sickness, poisoning, and it rendered humanity and a lot of other mammals sterile. So there have been no children born since this event. And 40, 50, 60 years later, this man named Greybeard, his name is actually Algie, and his wife have been living in a community on the Thames for about 11 years. And after their community kind of goes belly up due to poor management and leadership, they set down the Thames in a boat with a couple of their friends to go in search of something next. They don't seem to really have a goal in mind. They have to leave this community and they haven't seen the world. They haven't really seen how things have gone since they've been kind of in seclusion. So as they travel down the Thames, they see how the world has kind of collapsed, but also how it's changed, what settlements have been built. And there are flashbacks to the early days of their relationship and marriage right after this catastrophe happened, and people didn't really understand the implications. People thought for quite a while that this infertile problem would reverse itself, that humanity would overcome it. And actually they haven't. There has been no breakthrough. They haven't saved themselves, and they're literally just watching the last people on the earth dying. There's a little bit of hope near the end, but this book doesn't really shy away from this could really be the end. We did it to ourselves, and I thought that was very interesting. The main character, Greybeard, I never really liked him that much, however. He's not a bad person. In fact, he's a good person who has tried to make the right decisions, but some of them in hindsight weren't the right ones, or maybe weren't the best ones. He's very much a man, I think, who wants to stick to his principles, and that doesn't necessarily help you when you are trying to survive. Nevertheless, I did think the story was interesting. The reason why I rated this maybe 3 stars, I think, is that I think it was kind of dated. There are some dynamics in it, especially gender dynamics. This is always the problem for me in older science fiction that just bothered me. Algie Greybeard is very much in love with his wife. They have a very good relationship. They have a solid marriage, but there were just moments in the book where I was like, why are you talking to her this way? Why are you the one who has to make all the decisions? Why don't you listen to your wife a bit more? Despite all that, I am really glad I read it. I think it was a very different type of story that really tackles aging and the elderly, the idea of not having the next generation to help you, and of facing your death and the death of humanity with strength and equanimity, perhaps. So yeah, I enjoyed this. It was the first thing I've ever read by Aldiss, and I will definitely try to pick up his Heliconia trilogy next. For the letter I read The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman. This book and this series I've been seeing a ton of people reading and really enjoying them, and I have been getting real Thursday Next vibes from them. I love Jasper Fford's Thursday Next series when I was a teenager, and I've never found anything else quite like it, but I think this series fits the bill. So the idea of the Invisible Library is that there is a library, kind of a central library, that is connected to all sorts of alternate worlds by books, and the librarians are sent out like agents and spies to these worlds to retrieve books that are, you know, unique text to those worlds, bring them back to the library, which strengthens the ties between the library and that world. The main character, Irene, is a librarian, and she is sent out on her next mission to this alternate world with a new assistant, a librarian in training named Kai, who tags along. She's supposed to find a Brothers Grimm fairy tale book because it has something unique in it. It's a variation that's very special. And when she gets there, the book is missing and some people have been killed over it, and so she has to find the book, investigate the murders, and all the while trying to not reveal the secret of the library to the people she's working with. She comes across a detective who's basically an analog of Sherlock Holmes, which I think she's very pleased about. Like, she's very interested in Sherlock Holmes and detectives like him, so she has to work with this man while not revealing her real identity. This book was just a ton of fun. It was very fast-paced, things are always happening, there are multiple revelations and twists, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. I also really liked the main character, Irene. She gets things done, she seems quite practical, and she recognizes what's going on and she figures things out. Hopefully she continues to be like this. I will be a little disappointed if there is too much of a heavy romance subplot between her and this assistant Kai. I think he's an interesting person, but I much prefer her personality, honestly. So I will definitely be reading the other books in this series eventually, whenever I need something fun and lighter to read in between the heavy things. Next up is Jirel of Joiry by C.L. Moore. This is the first book in this omnibus, so I read about a third of it, not this entire thing. Jirel of Joiry itself is a collection of short stories that were written and published in the mid to late 1930s about a noble swords lady named Jirel. I think of her like a Joan of Arc character, except way more violent and less religious. Except all the stories themselves are very like devil, Satan, hell inspired. It was interesting. Unfortunately, I really didn't like this collection. I didn't like any of the stories. I thought everything left a lot to be desired. The character, the plots, which are mostly non-existent, and the writing just were not my thing. Jirel as a character I think is interesting historically as a badass female character who predates other more well-known characters like Red Sonja, just, you know, from the 1930s. This was interesting, but she's very flat and very one-note, and all the plots are basically driven by Jirel gets really mad at a dude for forcibly kissing her, which itself might be a euphemism for a more violent sexual act. I don't know. I was kind of trying to read between the lines here because it's from the 1930s. It's not going to be really explicit about those things. But basically, some dude comes on to Jirel, she gets super mad, she tries to kill him or have revenge, then she probably feels kind of bad about it later. The very first couple of stories are about how she wants to have revenge on this guy, she kills him, and then realizes that she didn't actually hate him, she had really fallen in love with him. No. No. So I don't think I would recommend this. It's like really early sword and sorcery fantasy, which I am not interested in. Other people probably like that more than I do. The only story that had me kind of interested was the one that has a crossover with, it's probably Northwest of Earth, the character from that who I've just forgotten his name of. He's the main character of that short story Shambleau, which was really very interesting horror science fiction. So I felt like that was the one story that had more of a science fictional tinge to it. I liked the crossover idea, but other than that, I was just waiting for it to be over. And finally, for the letter L, I reread The Lives of Christopher Chant by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a middle grade fantasy novel, the first one kind of in internal chronological order, I think, in the Crestomancy series. I think this is the third time I have reread this book, but it's the first time in maybe 15 years that I've read it, and it was amazing to me that in the first half of this it was just triggering so many memories. Like, I can't believe that I remembered some of the stuff in the first half of this. it must have really, really stuck with me. I also think that Lives of Christopher Chant is one of the very first things I read by Jones, this and A Tale of Two Cities in particular. So I think I remember them pretty vividly just for the impression they made on me, and then I went and I tried to read everything else by Jones after I had read them. So Crestomancy is like a title for a position, an enchanter, a sorcerer who has 9 lives and therefore has a lot of magic and is kind of like the chief magician of, I think, the magic users in multiple universes. I don't completely understand the world, to be honest. And in this book, this young boy named Christopher Chant is born with 9 lives, but nobody realizes that. And in fact, they think he doesn't have any magic. But as a child, he learns how to like spirit walk or dream walk, and he kind of thinks he's dreaming, but he's actually going to other worlds and meeting people, and then comes back and wakes up and nobody knows he's done this. But his kind of evil uncle figures out what he's been doing and ropes him in, unbeknownst to Christopher Chant, who is just a small child, to using his abilities to help his uncle's smuggling ring in these worlds. Then they discover that Chant has magical abilities and 9 lives, and he's going to be the next Crestomancy because there's nobody else to inherit that position from the current Crestomancy. It is just really good. It's really difficult to explain Jones's plots because she has this amazing ability to throw everything up in the air and it's all crazy, and then it just settles down and it just all makes sense. But describing the initial setup can be very confusing, and she tells stories intelligently, I think, for children, which is why I love rereading her books as an adult. There's something in there for older readers as well. So I love rereading this. The only disappointing thing, which is one of the few disappointing things I've ever had upon rereading Jones, is that there's some things in the conclusion about this like 11th world that they go to that's been closed off. And it's basically like the idea of the noble savage twisted around. It was off. There was something very unappealing about the people living there and their culture and how that was presented. I just didn't think that held up very well in the modern day, but don't let that stop you from reading it. I really hope to read the other Crestomancy books very soon. I keep getting pulled away from rereading books this year by so many other things I want to read, but I need to make it a priority. That is it for this part of my A to Z Readathon wrap-up. I'll be back soon with the next batch of 5 books for that, and until then, bye.